1803 and 1854, the United States significantly broadened its territorial holdings through strategic acquisitions, diplomatic agreements, and military campaigns. Accompanying this swift territorial expansion was the emergence of a contentious issue, determining whether newly acquired territories would be designated as free or slave states. Beyond merely a territorial matter, the slavery question had long fueled divisions in American public sentiment, and the ascent of an ardent abolitionist to a position of authority would serve as the catalyst for armed conflict. During the initial half of the 19th century, the United States pursued westward expansion, incorporating territories acquired from various nations, including France, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Mexico, among others. Within 5 decades, the nation's land area tripled, yet the government faced challenges in effectively administering these newly incorporated regions. A significant problem stemming from this expansion was the allocation of these territories, with northern states advocating for the establishment of free states, while southern states insisted on the creation of slave states. As you might anticipate, tensions escalated. The issue of slavery within the United States was reaching a critical point. While the North's economy experienced rapid growth and industrialization, supporting a population exceeding 23 million, the South's economy struggled, heavily reliant on slavery and agriculture, with a considerably smaller population of approximately 9 million, including 3.5 million enslaved individuals who, unsurprisingly, were unlikely to engage in combat. Both factions invoked the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to bolster their respective arguments. The South emphasized the right to property and asserted the option to secede from the Union at will, while the North viewed the nation as a unified entity governed by a central authority, referencing the principle of equality for all men. These foundational tenets of American society were subject to excessive interpretation by the Founding Fathers, leaving many to ponder their true intent. Could black individuals attain citizenship? Should slavery be abolished entirely? Cereal or milk first? On a more serious note, attempts to peacefully resolve the issue often resulted in highly controversial and outrageous compromises, such as the Compromise of 1850, which granted statehood to California, proposed that territories under the Missouri Compromise line determine their status independently, and enacted the Fugitive Slave Law, compelling all states, including those that had abolished slavery, to return escaped slaves. Nevertheless, tensions persisted as Northerners displayed reluctance to actively perpetuate the institution of slavery, partly due to a growing recognition of its immorality and the emergence of a novel political entity in the North, the Republican Party, established in 1854, which vehemently opposed slavery. The political climate was so volatile that members of Congress began carrying firearms, and physical altercations between representatives occasionally erupted. This provides insight into the prevailing political atmosphere in America leading up to the Civil War. The election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860, marking the first Republican president in history, served as the ultimate impetus for secession. Despite Lincoln's relatively moderate stance and initial lack of plans for immediate abolition, 7 slave states declared their secession and united to form the Confederacy under the leadership of Jefferson Davis, even before Lincoln assumed office in March 1861, thereby limiting his available options. Hostilities commenced in April 1861, when South Carolina initiated an attack on Fort Sumter following the government's refusal to comply with their demand for the evacuation of federal troops from the state. Following the fort's surrender, the government effectively resolved to take decisive action, requesting that each state contribute forces to reclaim the fort. 4 states declined to deploy forces against their neighbors and instead joined the Confederacy. 4 additional states, Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, and Kentucky, were slave states that opposed both secession and the use of coercion against the South. Subsequently, West Virginia was admitted as another border state after separating from Virginia. Concurrently, the South began mobilizing troops from its population. Initially, the Union faced challenges due to its relatively aged and less competent generals, while the South benefited from skilled commanders such as Robert E. Lee. Immediately after the onset of hostilities, the North implemented a naval blockade against the South to disrupt their supply lines. The first significant engagement of the war, the First Battle of Bull Run, took place on July 21, 1861, as the North attempted to seize the Southern capital, Richmond, resulting in a chaotic encounter. Many soldiers lacked combat experience. The flags of opposing sides were difficult to distinguish, and civilians traveled from afar to Virginia to observe the battle while picnicking. Despite incurring substantial casualties on both sides, the Confederacy ultimately repelled Northern forces, and the situation continued to deteriorate for the North for some time. However, a Northern general named Ulysses S. Grant began to distinguish himself through significant military successes in the West. By February 1862, the Union Army had secured victories in central Kentucky and Tennessee. The Army intended to advance southward and capture a vital Confederate east-west railway junction in northern Mississippi. The Battle of Shiloh resulted in heavy casualties, with over 23,000 soldiers killed or wounded on both sides, yet the Union emerged victorious. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, tensions arose with the United Kingdom due to what is now known as the Trent Affair. On November 8, 1861, United States forces intercepted Confederate diplomats aboard a British vessel, nearly precipitating a war between the two nations. Despite the diplomats' eventual release, European powers continued to threaten intervention due to the disruption of cotton imports from the South caused by the blockade. Encouraged by Confederate victories, Robert E. Lee launched an offensive into Northern Territory, aiming to threaten Washington, D.C. The meticulously planned attack appeared poised for success, but fate intervened when a soldier discovered the battle plans discarded near a cigar. Union soldiers found a copy of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's orders detailing the Confederates' plan for the Antietam campaign in Maryland. The Battle of Antietam, fought on September 17, 1862, remains the single bloodiest day in United States military history, with a combined death toll of 23,000. The inconclusive outcome temporarily thwarted Lee's designs to invade the North. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which abolished slavery in the Confederate States, thereby redefining the central purpose of the war. Transforming the conflict from one aimed at preventing secession to one dedicated to eradicating slavery, Lincoln imbued the Civil War with a new moral imperative. Beyond its ethical dimensions, Lincoln's decision bolstered the war's legitimacy and rendered intervention by France and the United Kingdom against the Union virtually untenable, as both nations had already abolished slavery, making such intervention appear hypocritical. The war had reached a crucial turning point. In July 1863, Robert E. Lee attempted another assault on Washington, D.C. in what would become the most celebrated battle of the war, the Battle of Gettysburg. It was widely understood that the victor of this battle would likely determine the outcome of the war. Union casualties totaled approximately 23,000, while Confederate casualties reached around 28,000. This engagement resulted in a resounding and decisive Northern triumph. Simultaneously, news from the West was equally encouraging, as Ulysses S. Grant gained control of the Mississippi River following the siege of Vicksburg. The concurrent victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg signaled a pivotal shift in the trajectory of the Civil War. Moreover, they dissuaded European powers from formally recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation, thereby withholding critical support. The devastation wrought by the war remained palpable in Gettysburg more than 4 months later, when, on November 19, 1863, the Soldiers' National Cemetery was dedicated. During this ceremony, which evolved into another seminal event in American history, President Abraham Lincoln paid tribute to the fallen and redefined the war's objectives in his momentous Gettysburg Address. On that day, despite not being the featured speaker, another individual reportedly delivered a 2-hour oration prior to Lincoln's address. It was Lincoln whose words resonated throughout history, overshadowing the preceding remarks. In a concise 271 words, Lincoln characterized the U.S. as a nation founded on liberty and committed to the principle of equality for all. In 1864, Ulysses S. Grant, whom Lincoln held in high esteem primarily due to his exceptional leadership as the foremost general of the Northern forces, despite his inclination towards whiskey, was appointed General-in-Chief of the Union Army and directed to launch a coordinated offensive on all fronts. Atlanta was besieged and subsequently captured by General William Sherman, while in the East, the two preeminent generals of the war, Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee, engaged in a series of battles that resulted in over 80,000 casualties within weeks, before ultimately converging near Richmond. Furthermore, in the 1864 election, Abraham Lincoln secured re-election with an overwhelming 91% approval rating. As Confederate generals resisted surrender, Sherman advanced from Atlanta, seizing control of Georgia and South Carolina while causing extensive destruction, including the burning of railroads and farms and liberating enslaved individuals. In the East, under increasing pressure from the Union, General Lee retreated from Grant's siege, and Confederate forces razed the city of Richmond, the capital of the South. Lee surrendered shortly thereafter, and other Confederate generals followed suit. The American Civil War had concluded. In Congress, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, was passed by the Senate on April 8, 1864, and by the House of Representatives on January 31, 1865. Tragically, Lincoln would not witness the ratification of his amendment and crowning achievement, as he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., and succumbed to his injuries the following day. The amendment was ratified by the requisite number of states on December 6, 1865. Confederate President Jefferson Davis was subsequently apprehended, and the South fell under military occupation. However, the most challenging task lay ahead: Reconstruction and reconciliation. The conflict resulted in over 750,000 fatalities, making it the deadliest war in American history. Black individuals would soon be granted citizenship and the right to vote. Families were reunited, and millions of black individuals experienced the end of decades of oppression. Yet the struggle for equality and against discrimination persists to this day. Even now, the ramifications of this war continue to shape the United States of America and its society as a whole. Echoing the spirit of Abraham Lincoln's era, we should strive for unity and progress. Little did Lincoln realize the enduring legacy he would leave as a compassionate president who safeguarded the nation and championed righteousness. He remains one of the most impactful and revered presidents in American history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and leave a comment. You can also subscribe to our channel. Until next time.